Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Adam Newman. I'm a partner and senior wealth advisor with Bernie Wealth Management, and I'm going to be the host and presenter for today's webinar on a topic that we all have to deal with at some point or another, and that's planning for Social Security benefits. I'm going to try to keep the presentation to under an hour, but a couple of quick housekeeping items and items to bring to your attention before we get started. There's going to be a couple of ways to interact with us and ask questions or submit questions based on what you hear today. I've got an email address listed below, which is seminar@bernie.com. If you prefer to use email, that's the best email address for questions. And also, if you come up with questions on the fly and want to use the chat function within Zoom, you should see that on your bottom panel or your right panel, depending on how you're accessing the webinar. But you should see the chat button, and you can use that to submit questions. And we'll see your email address and your question, and we're going to be happy to get back to everyone, based on your feedback and the questions that you had. Last item is we posted a PDF, which you should see currently in the chat. The chat box, which is a great resource. It's a kind of a 1 or 2 pager, which is going to summarize a lot of the information that I'm going to cover today. So these are some complex topics, and sometimes it helps to hear things, see things, and then read them again. So please feel free to utilize that document as a follow-up. And certainly, I'll also give instructions at the end on how we can all interact with one another post-webinar and have a meeting if necessary. So in terms of the agenda, my main goal for today is to do several things. I want to help you quantify the value of Social Security benefits. I want to help you answer the key question that we get from clients a lot of times, which is it even going to be there for me, or is it going to run out of money? We're going to go through some of the fundamentals of how benefits are calculated, and you'll see some of the complexity behind it, but I'll do my best to make it as simple as possible to help you understand how do they arrive at the number in terms of the monthly income you're going to receive. And then lastly, I'm going to walk through some of the types of benefits that are provided by the Social Security Administration, and just some of the common mistakes and pitfalls that we've seen people make over the years when they're going through that process. So 2 things that I'll say before we get started is, number one, like many things the government's involved in, if you think about the tax code, you think about Medicare, and if you certainly think about Social Security, they tend to be very complex and complicated. So to think about the hour time we have allotted, my goal is to really focus on the fundamentals, the things you should be thinking about, how you should be thinking about your benefit in the context of your overall plan, how you should approach the decision-making process when claiming benefits. Those, I feel, are the main priorities versus trying to understand the nitty-gritty details, which can be very confusing and complicated. So I think it's best to kind of take what you learned today, come up with additional questions, and feel free to leverage us as a resource to really align those questions with, what's unique to your personal situation. And prior to the webinar, we did some research with some of our clients and in talking with some of our advisors of, when it comes to Social Security and the big decisions that come behind it, what are the biggest questions, the 5 main questions that we run into, most frequently. And so this is, what we've compiled as the 5 most, common, frequently asked questions, and, ones that likely apply to all of us when we're going through that decision process. And many of these I'm going to try to answer today as we work through the agenda. So let's start with, topic number 1, which is, are you really aware, or are we really aware of the value that Social Security provides over our lifetimes? And this is probably, I'd like to start here because, a lot of times our benefit is just a number on a page. We see our statement, we know what we're entitled to at a certain age, but I think the first major hurdle to get over is how do we quantify that into a dollar amount, similar to the assets that we have, like our investment accounts, IRAs, 401ks. They accumulate to larger sums that we can compare to one another when we're planning for retirement. But how do we really quantify the tangible value of Social Security over our lifetimes? And so I'm going to give you an example, assuming a monthly benefit of $2,000 today, and assuming you receive that benefit and you live 10, 20, or 30 more years. And what's the cumulative sum that you would receive over over those various periods of time, including the cost of living adjustments that we receive each year due to inflation? So if you look at these dollar values, number one, it highlights the impact of the actual decision that we need to make. That the monetary value of that claiming decision is incredibly important. And it also helps you to compare the value of this relative to some of your other assets. It's not uncommon for people to accumulate $1 million, $2 million, buckets of resources such as IRAs and 401ks for retirement. And the decision you make around Social Security can really be almost an equivalent of that if you think of its lifetime value. So a lot of the mistakes and the strategies we'll talk about, we have to do that with the context of the actual monetary value of it, over our lifetime. And if you like to think of it as an income stream, because that's really what it is, it's a monthly payment we get for our lifetime. That's adjusted for inflation as well. The benefit that we receive today, what might that grow to in the future on a monthly basis, depending upon when we claim and its timing. So going back to our original example of a $2,000 a month benefit, assuming the cost of living adjustment, which the average has been just over 2.5%, what will that benefit grow to be after 10, 20, and 30 years? And so as things get more expensive, as lifestyle changes through retirement, this monthly amount grows to be something substantial. It keeps pace generally with inflation. And again, we can't outlive it. We're going to get that payment for our lifetime. So looking at the dollar, the lump sum value we looked at on the previous slide, and also looking at it as an income stream like we do here, it really, I think, hammers home the idea of the importance of this decision we need to make, and some of the factors that come along with it. So many people don't really put it into that context first, so I always find that helpful. But we can't really dive into any of the details around, claiming strategies or types of, timing around decisions and amounts until we really understand and can help answer that question, will it even be there for me? And unfortunately, this has been, it has been and likely will continue to be a very hot button topic in the political world. But I think the simple way to tackle this concern is one of two ways. And the first is we're going to look at the facts. So if you tell me that something is going bankrupt, I'm assuming in most cases that it's, if it's in a case of a company or a household, you're assuming that they're completely running out of money. So a lot of the language that's being used and the conversations that are out there have to do with people getting, struck with fear that their benefits are just going to go away completely. And if you look at the facts behind it, that's simply not true. And this chart up here is taken directly from the Social Security website. And what this is doing is it's essentially helping us visualize what's going to happen to Social Security funding over time if nothing changes. And that's the operative phrase there, if nothing changes. So at this point, and in 2035, which is, just under 15 years from now, in terms of the tax receipts that we receive, which pay for most of the benefits, if you compare that to the benefits that we will have projected to need to be paying, it's going to meet about 80% of the liability by 2035. So, and if you want to look at this over an even longer period of time, that drops down to about 73% of payable benefits by 2095. So is there a problem that needs to be addressed based on these numbers? Absolutely. We want 100% funding. We want to know that those payments will continue in full for our lifetime. But there's a very big difference between saying something's going bankrupt or something's going to zero and saying we're only going to have enough available funds to cover 80% of benefit payments in 15 years if nothing changes. So that covers the factual piece. But on the forward-looking political aspect of it, this is certainly something that needs to be addressed, and I think will be, over the next several years. And there's been several ideas that have been floating around out there as a way to tackle this problem and get us from 80% funding to 100. And without getting too far into the details, some of it has revolved around increasing the amount of earnings that can be subject to the Social Security tax. So right now, if you have a paycheck, some portion of the Social Security tax is paid by you, the other half is paid by your employer, and that goes directly into the trust fund that helps pay these benefits to those that are collecting. So there's been talk about increasing the amount of your income that can be subject to that tax. There's been talk about raising the full retirement age, which we'll look at in a second. There's been talks about lowering future benefits for those that haven't been accruing benefits or are entitled to collect them yet. And then there's been talk about reducing the cost of living adjustments. So these are obviously fluid and subject to change, but there is active conversation out there around addressing the problem. And I think if you view it from a political standpoint in terms of the millions of Americans that rely on this system and the millions that will continue to rely on it, you can never say, that this is a black and white solution, but I think everyone is very heavily motivated, especially politicians whose constituents make up a lot of people that are going to rely on these income streams. There's a lot of firepower that's, in motion to help them get this fixed. So main takeaway, I think the odds are in favor of us, making improvements that we need to fully fund the system and provide those security for retirees. So understanding the value, the long-term dollar value of benefits, understanding the funding situation is just, kind of the first piece of the puzzle. But the next is, helping you better understand, how your benefits are calculated and answer that question, how much can I expect to receive? So if you look at your individual benefits, and I'm highlighting individual because we're going to talk about spousal benefits, divorced spouse benefits, and survivor benefits in a second. But if you look at, you as an individual, what are you entitled to in terms of a benefit and how is that calculated? There's two main inputs that go into that calculation. The first is how much you've earned, how long you've worked and how much you've earned over your working life, which we'll talk about in a second. So the longevity of your career and how much you've earned. And then number two, the age at which you decide to apply for benefits. So one of the things that we'll get into more detail on is you can apply for benefits as early as age 62 or as late as age 70. And when you decide to turn on your benefits, that can equate to a much lower, a much higher amount that you're entitled to based on your working history. So those are the two main inputs into your benefit amount. And let's go into some of the specifics around how it's calculated so you can understand, the inputs and the magnitude of them. But something that I think is a great starting point for you to know as a resource, years ago, the Social Security Administration used to actually mail you a statement every year with an update on your benefit amount and your work history. And it came in the mail and it was consistent and it really helped people planning for retirement stay on top of where they were trending. But as part of their budget cuts several years ago, they've gone away with most of those mailings. And so right now, the best resource to kind of get a snapshot of where your benefit is and your work history and earnings history is to do it online. So if you go to the SSA.gov website, they've got a lot of great tools that you can use to register and calculate your benefit and model out certain scenarios. But in terms of getting your actual statement, that right now I've found is the quickest and most reliable way to do so. So once you get in there and you download your statement, it's going to look a little bit like this. You're going to open the PDF and you'll see that first page. And in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a dollar amount. And that dollar amount is known as your primary insurance amount. and that's the monthly benefit that you're entitled to receive at your full retirement age. And again, this dollar amount is a function of two things. It's a function of your work history and earnings history, and it's also a function of it will ultimately be a function of when you start to decide claiming benefits. So that's your quote unquote number. And the full retirement age is something that's out there and accessible and pretty transparent. But that dollar amount on the upper right-hand corner of your statement, you get it at your full retirement age. And here, based on the left, you see various years of birth. And on the right, you see full retirement age, the breakdown of how they define it. So obviously, if you're born between 1955 and 59, you've got to deal with the partial month minutia that can get a little bit confusing. But between 1943 and 1954, your full retirement age is 66. So on the prior, page, that 2,000 or so a month, that would be the age at which you can claim it. And if you're born 1960 or later, it's 67 is your full retirement age. So that's the timing and the way to at least navigate the first page of that statement in the context of your benefit. Also in that statement, after you download it, is several pages back, you're going to notice your earnings record. And this is going to be, I'm going to reference this when I talk about how your benefits calculated, but this is going to go all the way back, think to your teenage years when you had a part-time job and your first job in middle school or high school. It's going to start there. That's going to go all the way to today. And it's going to show you each year the amount that you paid in terms of, your tax, Social Security earnings over time. And that's what this becomes the basis of how they calculate, what your projected benefit amount is. So one thing I encourage everyone to do as they're reviewing this, it doesn't happen too often, but there are instances where, earnings will get misreported or even, there'll be a zero somewhere where there shouldn't be. So to the best extent that you can and using prior tax returns, I really encourage you to just spot check, your earnings record and see if there's any mistakes, because it does happen. So how do they calculate this amount? We looked on that hypothetical Social Security statement on the upper right-hand corner at that, potential benefit amount. How do they arrive at that number? And again, like anything that involves the government, it tends to be a little more calculated than it needs to be. But in theory, what they do is at age 62, they make a ranking, 1 to 35 of your highest years of earnings. So they take your highest 35 years of earnings and they apply a formula to it. And that formula will, the output of that will be your average index monthly earnings. And so this is indexed for inflation. So they know in 1985, if you made $50,000, that's a lot different than making $50,000 today. So those 35 years of earnings are adjusted for inflation and averaged out over 35 years, and you get a dollar amount as a result of that. And they don't stop there. They apply certain breakpoints, almost like you think of the tax system that's progressive. They apply certain breakpoints to various dollar amounts of those earnings, and they use that to finally come up with your benefit amount. So they call them bend points, but those break points are really meant to help make sure that those on the lower end of the earnings spectrum get a greater percentage of their share of earnings than those on the higher end of the income spectrum. So on the Social Security website, they've got a lot of great examples of how that's calculated. It's also on the PDF that's provided in the chat room here, if you want a little more context to how that's done. But the long and short of it is top 35 years of earnings, adjusted for inflation. Then they adjusted for these various breakpoints to make sure those on the lower end of the income spectrum, they're not shortchanged relative to those that have paid in more. And then that's the benefit amount, ultimately that you become entitled to. And that's the amount that ends up on the top right-hand corner of your statement. So a couple of points on this. When I say they rank it 1 to 35, if you don't have 35 years of earnings, those lines are filled with 0. So if you've got 30 years of earnings record, then it's, those 30 years are inventoried out, but then you've got 5 zeros. And that's very important for you to look at, because that also helps you understand that working an extra year or two, replacing any zero with a number for each additional year of work is going to actually have a pretty meaningful impact on the benefit that you're entitled to. So as you're looking at your benefit statement, as you're thinking of, whether or not I should work an additional year potentially, just know that if you don't have 35 years of history, that additional year of work, anytime you replace a zero in that 35-year list, it's gonna be very impactful. And so I said before, there's a spectrum of ages at which you can claim, 62 being the earliest, 70 being the latest. And we talked about full retirement age. Everything is benchmarked to your full retirement age. If you claim between 62 and your full retirement age, you're considered to be claiming early. So before full retirement age is considered claiming early, and you get a deduction to your benefit for doing that. So it's not that you can wake up at 62 and say, okay, I'm going to just go ahead and collect that $2,000 or so figure that's listed on my statement, and I'm going to move on, I'm going to retire, and that's the paycheck I'm going to get from the government. That's not the way it works. Between 62 and your full retirement age, there's a discount that's applied each year, and that discount follows you for life. So claiming early, if you're going to, claiming before your full retirement age can have a significant financial impact, especially if you end up living for a lot longer than you expect. And this table, I think, does a great job of helping you understand what that is. If your full retirement age is 66 versus 67, what percentage of that, full retirement age benefit would you be receiving? So, for example, if your full retirement age is 66 and you say, you know what, forget about it, I don't want to wait, I'm going to claim at 62, you only get 75% of that benefit. And if your full retirement age is 67, and again, you wake up at 62 and say, you know what, I'm just going to claim and move on, you only get 70% of that benefit. So that is something to think about it as I talk through considerations for claiming. Something you'll really want to think about is that discount can be, and especially when you apply the cost of living adjustments that you receive over your lifetime, that could be a pretty big, haircut to take, financially. And especially when you think about that first slide I showed that outlined the dollar impact of Social Security over time being potentially, $1 million+ dollars, early claiming can really, hurt that significantly. But what about the other end of the spectrum? As I said before, you can claim between 62 and 70. What if you say, you know what, it's my full retirement age, but I'm still working, I have other resources, I don't think I need to collect my benefit just yet. If that's the case, then just like the government penalizes you on the front end, they actually reward you for delaying on the back end. And so if you delay past full retirement age, you're entitled to something annually, what they call a delayed retirement credit. It comes out to be about 8% per year for every year that you delay past full retirement age up till 70. So same, chart as what we looked at before. I've got, those that have a full retirement age of 66 in the first column, those with 67 in the second column. And you can see what percentage of your benefit that you receive for each year that you delay. So for example, someone whose full retirement age was 66, they wake up on that day, they say, you know what, don't need Social Security, I'm going to wait. If they wait till they're 70, they now get 132% of what that original benefit was. And if you're 67, you get 124% of that original benefit. And everything in between. It's not either or. You can wait till 68, 69, whatever, fits your overall plan and your objectives. But there is a substantial reward for those obtaining those delayed credits. And when I talk about spousal benefits, I'll emphasize that even more. But something to also note, just like I talked about the inflation adjustment for regular and early benefits, you get that same cost of living adjustments on the benefits that you've delayed. So not only do you get these 8% per year bumps for delaying, but once you start claiming that benefit, you'll also get the inflation adjustments each year as well. So in terms of the cumulative value of that can be very substantial over time. So in terms of thinking about, because the logical next question when you look at some of those numbers is, well, when should I claim? What are the most important considerations that I should be thinking about when it comes to determining for me individually when's the best time to claim Social Security? And the first thing is, and this is a fairly simple exercise. It's what's my retirement budget going to be, and what percentage of Social Security of my income will Social Security represent? So that's called your replacement ratio. How much of my retirement budget will be fulfilled by Social Security, benefits? And on average, if you look at just the country as a whole, Social Security for about 2/3 of Americans makes up over half of their income need. So something to think about is, based on the assets I have and my spending, what amount is Social Security, going to need to replace? And that'll help start to guide you towards the right decision. If your replacement ratio is lower, then that's going to give you a little bit more flexibility in your decision, and maybe even allow you to claim a little bit later if you've got significant other resources to help fill that gap. And the nature of your other resources is important too. Are these 401ks, IRAs? Do you have other pensions? A lot of people look at the Social Security decision in isolation, and you really have to think about these other buckets of assets and resources that you have, with the goal being, how do I put myself in a position to delay claiming as long as I can so I can earn those delayed retirement credits? The other piece of it is also health status. The only instance, I get the question a lot, well, in what case should I claim early? And I know my full retirement age, but in what instance does it really make sense to claim before that? And I say in most cases, there's really only two. The first being your health status. If you are terminally ill, or if based on your health situation, you're not going to, your longevity is not significant, then that might lead to early claiming so that you can get what you can out of the system. Number two would be if you don't have really any other financial resources. So those, I think, that are claiming early, it's often out of necessity. They don't have other assets to tap into to help bridge the gap while they delay taking their benefits. So those are the two main reasons, but health status being a really big one. And the last piece, and what I'm about to go into in more detail, is who else is going to depend on your benefit? One of the biggest pitfalls I see with spouses when they're making claiming decisions, they look at it individually. The husband or wife will say, I'm going to collect based on what I think is, the highest benefit that I've earned personally, and they'll move on. But as you'll see in a second, you really need to think of these decisions as a household. And when the higher earner is making a decision around whether they should claim or delay, they're really making it for both spouses. And we'll quantify that a little bit, but that's something that's incredibly important to make this decision in the context of your overall situation and not in isolation. And then B, if you're married, make it as a team. Make this a spousal decision based on some of the factors we're about to talk about. So spousal benefits is an area, I think, of great confusion. Unfortunately, this is probably the key piece of the system that can cause people to make some premature and ill-advised decisions. So I'm going to stick to the basics here and try to help you understand how they work. And then we can follow up with any additional questions that might be personal to you. But spousal benefits were put in place by the government to make sure that you go back many decades ago when Social Security was first implemented. They wanted to make sure that those stay-at-home spouses could be entitled to some sort of a benefit from the Social Security system. So the birth of spousal benefits was, at that time, the makeup of America was primarily one earner in the household. The other spouse would stay at home, and the need and desire to want to compensate them for that work, even though they weren't paid wage by an employer, they wanted to compensate the stay-at-home spouse, so they came up with spousal benefits. And the amount of the spousal benefit is 1/2 of the primary worker's benefit based on their full retirement age. And I'm going to use some examples to help kind of ingrain this in a little more detail. But it's 1/2 of the primary worker's primary insurance amount. So this example here, we've got a husband and wife, John and Jane. John's primary insurance amount is $2,000. Jane, at some point, has work history, and her primary insurance amount is $800 based on her earnings record. If Jane waits till her full retirement age, she's going to get half of John's. So she'll get $1,000 versus her $800 because she's entitled to the spousal benefit. And so that's, helps you, kind of quantify how that works just at the highest level. But spousal benefits allow the spouse with the lower earnings record to get a little bit of a higher amount if they wait until their full retirement age. So a couple of requirements for spousal benefits to occur, and a couple of things to really think about in the context of how they work. The first thing is the primary worker must have filed for benefits already. So in the case of John and Jane, if John hadn't already collected benefits, there is no spousal benefit there for Jane to take. The first trigger point is that the higher earning spouse needs to be collecting. And so that's an area, I think, of great confusion. Them turning on their benefit is the trigger point for spousal benefits to be collected. Second, and this is another equally as important point, is the spouse has to be at least 62 for a reduced benefit, or 66 or their full retirement age for their full benefit. So in the case of John and Jane, Jane or whoever the spouse is collecting the spousal benefit, they don't just get half because John is full retirement age and he's entitled to half. They need to wait until their full retirement age to get their, their full spousal benefit. So some people will say, well, my spouse is, full retirement age, they're going to get $2,000 a month. That means even though I'm 62 or, 63, I'm going to get the same amount. There's actually a reduction before full retirement age to that spousal benefit. So both spouses need to wait till full retirement age for that to happen. Once the spouse collecting the spousal benefit has hit that point, then they can turn on benefits and get their half. And another quirk here is we know on the front end, spousal benefits are reduced just like individual benefits are. But as individual benefits on the back end between full retirement age and 70, that you get those delayed retirement credits every year, you do not get those for spousal benefits. So that's another area of confusion. For a spouse that continues to delay, your spousal benefit is capped at whatever half of the primary insurance amount is at their full retirement age. You don't get those delayed credits. The higher earning spouse can get delayed retirement credits, but you as a spouse don't get increases to your spousal benefits based on the delayed earning amount. And so a couple of things to think about in the context of spousal benefits and planning for two spouses. Some questions to ask yourselves are, how close are our benefits, individual benefits, to one another? So if you have two spouses, long working careers, high projected individual benefits, that's going to lead to a totally different set of decision making than if you have a situation where one spouse has worked, the other spouse has spent most of their time at home, and you've got lopsided benefits in one direction or another. So those types of factors and the situational factors become very important here. And as I get to talking about divorce benefits and widow and widower benefits, you're going to see exactly why that's the case. And I'm going to circle back on that. But these are just some of the basics of the spousal benefits that are for purposes of this conversation, incredibly important. And so you've got spousal benefits, but then you have survivor benefits. So we're going to use several more examples here to talk about what happens when one spouse passes away. What happens to either or both of our benefits when that happens. And these are known as survivor benefits. So survivor benefits depend on, I'll give you kind of two core principles behind survivor benefits before we get into examples. The survivor benefit amount is going to depend on the age at which the deceased spouse originally claimed his or her benefit, And if the deceased spouse claimed before their full retirement age, the survivor benefit's going to be limited to the higher of whatever that benefit was, or 82.5% of the widow or widower's primary insurance amount. And that's a very confusing statement. The examples are going to help significantly, but that's, word for word, that's how this operates. And the examples, I think, are going to reinforce that. But really, that's a long way of saying there's an additional layer of protection for widows and widowers, so that they're not fully penalized based on when their spouse claims, that there's an added layer of protection, almost a floor, saying that they're going to get the higher of one or two benefits, when a death occurs. And unlike, speaking of protection for survivors, unlike spousal benefits, survivors are entitled to the delayed retirement credits that happen between full retirement age and 70. So while a spousal benefit, you're capped at full retirement age, survivor benefits can continue to accrue those delayed credits as another added layer of protection for survivors. And in the examples, again, I think we're going to really enforce that well. And so the survivor benefit amount's also going to depend on the age at which the widow or widower decides to turn on the benefit. And so as a widow or widower, something that's very different is, unlike the 62 to 70 range you have for your own benefit or spousal benefits, you can claim as early as 60. So just think about, in the case of death, the government wanting to add just several layers of protection to survivors. One of them was they added this floor in terms of benefit amounts, so that the surviving spouse can earn delayed credits and get the higher of one or two amounts. The second is they're going to let you claim a little bit earlier than you normally would be able to. But again, just like anything as it relates to claiming early, whether you're an individual, a spouse, or a surviving spouse, if you claim early, you're penalized. So that's one area where the survivor isn't helped as much as they are in other areas. There's a penalty that's applied just like it is across the board. So let's get into the examples. I think, with some of the confusion around spousal survivor benefits, I think this is going to help us. So in this particular example, we're going to look at it is if a spouse dies while both are receiving benefits, and what it looks like when you get to switch to the higher benefit. In this instance, we've got Joe and Julie. They're married. They're both over full retirement age. At the time, Joe's benefit's $2,000 a month. Julie's is $1,200 a month. Joe passes away. Julie's $1,200 benefit is now replaced by her survivor benefit, which is $2,000 a month. So a key point with regards to survivor benefits is you can't double dip. You don't get to continue to collect both when one spouse passes. You just get to replace whatever the higher benefit is with your own. So in this case, they're both, think through the fact pattern here. They're both above full retirement age. They're both collecting. This is very simple. We just replace Julie's benefit with Joe's higher benefit, and it continues for life. So what if we have a case of early claiming, going back to Joe and Julie? We're going to say, similar fact pattern where Joe, his primary insurance amount is $2,000 a month, and Joe decides that he's going to file for Social Security at 62. So what happens? We already know what happens when you do that. You get a reduction in your benefit amount. And if you go back to that table, if you claim at 62, you get 75% of what your benefit is. And in this case, that $2,000 would go down to $1,500 a month. But then Joe died. So what happens to Julie? So following the case and the exceptions for survivor benefits, what happens when we have a survivor that had claimed early? If Julie claims her survivor benefit at her full retirement age or later, her benefit's going to be one or the other numbers. It's either going to be 82.5% of Joe's $2,000 or $1,650 a month, or if she claims it at age 60, her benefit's going to be reduced significantly to $1,430 a month. So notice in this case, what happened is Joe passed away, even though he was collecting at 62. Julie waited until her full retirement age And so that allowed her, if you go back to those, think back to those protections for survivors, Julie was really saved by that floor amount of 82.5% of Joe's $2,000. And that's why she got the higher amount relative to what Joe was already claiming. That's, I think, a really good example of how those protections work. But again, the key here is Julie had to wait. She still waited to her full retirement age. And in the case that she doesn't wait for her full retirement age and she claims benefits early, just like everyone else, no exception, she's penalized for doing that. But what about if we have delayed claiming? Same set of facts. Joe's, benefit is $2,000 a month. He waits till he's 70. What happens when we do that? We get delayed credits every year. So now he has, instead of $2,000 a month, he's claiming $2,640 a month. He gets that 132% increase, but then he passes away. What happens? She can do several things. And this is, I think, where it gets interesting with survivor benefits. If she claims at 60, she's going to get a reduction in whatever Joe's benefit was. Again, no exceptions. She claims early, she's penalized for that based on what Joe's benefit was. If she waits until her full retirement age or later, her benefit is going to be whatever Joe's was. So it goes up to that, $2,640 a month. She gets the full survivor benefit that she was entitled to based on Joe's earnings record and, based on Joe having earned those, delayed credits. So she gets to capture the full benefit of that just by waiting the full retirement age. So this is why it's very important when you are thinking about these decisions in terms of when to claim. You have to think of the impact that your decision is going to have on a potential surviving spouse, the differences in your age, the amount of resources you're going to have in other areas to fill the gap so that a surviving spouse doesn't need to be put in a position where they need to claim early, because we know that that can have a significant impact on benefit amounts. And so that's all, I think the undertone of that, discussion is, how is this going to work? If something happens to me, what's your plan? And how do we protect against that to the best extent possible? So some requirements for survivor benefits to occur, with some criteria. The couple has to have been married for at least 9 months at the date of death, number one. Number two, as I said before, the survivor must be at least 60 in order to claim versus 62. That's one of those little exceptions to help survivors. Number three, if there's a remarriage, and you'll see this in the case of divorce benefits, if there's a remarriage, things can get tricky. So a survivor benefit might not be available if the widow or widower remarries before the age of 60. And we're going to talk about divorce benefits in a second, but those are some of the main criteria for survivor benefits that we really need to think about in the context of this decision. So with divorce spouse benefits, I think this is one of the more unique aspects of the Social Security system. And I'm going to tell you why in a second, but divorce spouse benefits are going to be exactly the same as spousal benefits as long as, number one, your marriage lasted for 10 years or more. Number two, the person receiving the divorce spouse benefits has not remarried. And number three, the ex-spouse is at least 62 years old. So essentially what this does is, and this is very clearly a protection against those that are in a divorce that don't have an earnings record, that might be really shortchanged by the system because they no longer have a spouse to attach themselves to for benefit purposes. This is a protection against that, very similar to the regular spousal benefits. So you have to have been married for 10 years and you can remarry. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how this works, but some additional points to think about. And I think this is the most interesting aspect of all of this is more than one ex-spouse can receive benefits on the same worker. So if you have someone that has 4 ex-spouses that they were married to all for 10 years or more, and none of them have remarried, all 4 of those ex-spouses can claim a divorce spouse benefit against their record. It doesn't impact their benefit. So even if you have 4 ex-spouses claiming against your benefit, it's not going to impact what's paid to you. but it allows for an unlimited number of people to claim on your benefit if the fact pattern lines up. However, if you're collecting divorced spouse benefits and you remarry at any point, that ends. And that's an important piece, as you're thinking about, just life fact patterns. That's something that comes up often, but it's something that people don't know about. And when you're thinking about divorced spouse benefits specifically, and other benefits too, this is probably a great place to highlight, never assume that the Social Security Administration is going to do this for you. So if you've been involved in a divorce, especially, a lot of times it becomes a proactive exercise to contact your local Social Security office. They're going to want to see the marriage certificate, the divorce decree, and they're going to want to use and whatever other information you can provide to help track down what that benefit, amount is, and make sure that you're able to collect on it, because it does not. It's not something I would rely on the government to figure out. This especially is something to be proactive about. And also in the case of, just to layer something else on top of this, also in the case of divorced spouse benefits, if you have not remarried, you're also entitled to survivor benefits for your, prior spouse as well. So if you've been involved in divorce and have not remarried, I think this is a point to absolutely be proactive where you can. And so I would say, if we have to summarize some of the key pieces and factors as it relates to the Social Security claiming decision and the ins and outs of it, main takeaways here are, absolutely think of this in the context of your situation, number one. Number two, take the time to learn, the ins and outs where you can. And if not, certainly rely on us and our team of experienced professionals to help you understand what you should be thinking about as it relates to your situation, because a lot of this becomes irrevocable. And a lot of this can have a significant dollar, impact over the rest of your life. So this can be a very confusing topic. We understand that. And sometimes hearing things once, you need some repetition. You need to read, hear, see things. So leverage the resource that was provided in the chat room. We'll also be recording this, and so feel free to rewatch it where needed. And then lastly, certainly take us up on the offer to speak with a member of our team to have any of your specific questions answered. So I know we didn't get to go through all of the ins and outs from top to bottom because of the complexity and because everyone's situation is different, but we're more than happy to get on the phone and walk through what we need to as it relates to you personally. And then finally, we've got this email down here, seminar@bernie.com. We're ready and able to answer whatever questions you have and go from there. So I want to thank everyone for their time and attention. This can be often a pretty dry topic, but hopefully this was helpful and you learned a thing or two. And we hope to talk to you sometime soon. Take care.